The Anomaly, Tensura X Data Live, by Nocturne_Chapter 47. A War Beyond Reason. Westcott POV. Inside one of the massive DEM airships floating above the world, Ellen Mathers stood in her launch chamber, her CR unit fully equipped. The dim red lighting cast an ominous glow around her as she checked over her systems, ensuring everything was prepared for their next move. Just then, the quiet hum of the ship was interrupted by the sharp chime of an incoming call. The screen in front of her flickered to life, revealing the composed but ever-calculating face of Isaac Westcott. Ellen answered immediately, her expression neutral. Westcott wasted no time with pleasantries. "Ellen, I'm sorry for the suddenness, but I've decided to expedite our plans." Ellen's brows furrowed slightly. "Expedite? Why the sudden urgency?" Westcott leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes gleaming with intrigue. "The situation has changed." "No, it seems like it's about to change from now on." Ellen narrowed her gaze. "What do you mean?" Westcott's lips curled into a knowing smirk, reveling in the advantage he had gained. "It's thanks to Beelzebub." Ellen stiffened at the mention of the Demon King he had successfully obtained. "Does that mean Beelzebub has discovered something new?" Westcott nodded, his expression darkening slightly. "That's right. It appears that we suffered a painful defeat once." He paused before adding, "in a future we are no longer aware of." Ellen's grip tightened around the armrest beside her. "A future we lost?" The very idea was infuriating. "Then, does that mean we were defeated by her?" Westcott's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew wider. "Yes. Though part of our plan was ultimately to lose to destroyer Rimuru Tempest." Ellen's frustration was barely concealed, but she knew Westcott never made reckless moves. If he had orchestrated a scenario where they were meant to lose, then it was part of a larger scheme. And yet, Westcott's eyes gleamed with something deeper, an unsettling revelation. Even though he had searched the outcome using Beelzebub's knowledge, what he found shocked even him. Even if they had fought with all their might, even if they had played every card available to them, they never stood a chance against her. Beelzebub's omniscience had laid out the brutal truth before him. The overwhelming power of the Demon Lord. The sheer impossibility of victory. And yet, despite that, Westcott remained intrigued rather than discouraged. He tapped his fingers against his armrest thoughtfully. Losing the battle didn't mean losing the war. Ellen, however, had a different perspective. She clenched her fists. "Even if that's the case, I have no interest in playing a game where we are doomed to fail." Westcott chuckled lightly. "Oh, don't misunderstand, Ellen. We may not be able to win in the conventional sense, but we have gained something valuable from that inevitable failure." Ellen remained silent, waiting for him to elaborate. Westcott's smile deepened. "We now possess crucial data on Rimuru's combat abilities. Beelzebub had revealed much, too much. Rimuru could infuse Riryoku into any part of her body. She had an unorthodox ability to mix techniques in unpredictable ways. Most terrifyingly, she could adapt, evolve, and grow stronger instantly. A being that did not just fight, but one that learned, surpassed, and transcended limits in the midst of battle." Ellen absorbed this information, her eyes narrowing. That alone explained why Westcott had no intention of a direct confrontation. If they couldn't defeat Rimuru through brute force, then they would simply have to use other means. Westcott exhaled slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. Even with all the knowledge Beelzebub had granted him, there was no simple method to defeat Rimuru. Power alone wasn't enough. She was an anomaly, an entity that could adapt and surpass any limitation placed upon her. But that didn't mean he had no options. His smirk widened as a new plan took shape in his mind. If brute force wouldn't work, then they would simply turn the board in their favor. "It's time we make use of our greatest piece, the spirit of origin." Ellen's expression didn't waver, but there was a sharpness in her gaze as she processed his words. "So we're bringing her into this after all?" Westcott gave a slight nod. "That's right. If we want to rewrite the outcome, and she'll surely show herself for that exact moment." Ellen crossed her arms, considering the implications. The spirit of origin, the one from whom all spirits were derived. She had always been a wild card, a force that could tip the scales of fate itself. If they succeeded in bringing her out, then she might be able to give Rimuru some trouble. Westcott turned back toward the screen, his smirk never fading. Now then, Ellen. This time, we will make the first move. He clasped his hands together, exuding an aura of absolute confidence. Prepare the power plant. We'll also need to gather some talismans, every catalyst necessary to bring forth the spirit of origin. Ellen remained composed but nodded in confirmation. Understood. I'll see to it immediately, Westcott chuckled. Good. Let's rewrite destiny together. With those final words, the screen dimmed and the call ended. Westcott leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling of his dimly lit chamber. The future they had once lost had now become irrelevant. This was their future now, one that they would shape with their own hands. Shidhu pawed. The cold night air brushed against Shidhu's skin as he walked through the dimly lit streets, his mind weighed down by the burden of knowledge. He had left Fraxinus with a clear purpose, and he knew that he wasn't alone. Kurumi was watching. She always was. Even now, her clones were undoubtedly lurking in the shadows, observing his every move. Shidhu came to a stop beneath a street lamp and spoke aloud, his voice steady. We need to talk. Just for a moment. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, as if answering his call, a figure emerged from the darkness. A Kurumi clone, distinguished by the eye patch covering her left eye. Eyepatch Kurumi regarded him with her usual composed smile, but there was a glint of curiosity in her right eye. Era, how rare for you to summon me directly. What is it you wish to discuss, Shido-san? Shidhu wasted no time. It's about the upcoming battle. The spirit of origin, she's coming. The playful amusement in Kurumi's expression faded slightly. I see, but that wasn't the worst of it. Shidhu took a deep breath before continuing. And on February 22nd, the main body of you will die, killed by her. A cold silence followed. Kurumi's smile didn't waver, but the subtle tightening of her fingers betrayed her emotions. She was trying to contain it, the frustration, the hatred, the sheer unfairness of it all. Shidhu could see it in her stance, in the way her eye burned with suppressed fury. He sighed. I don't expect you to just accept this, but you need to know the truth before it's too late. Kurumi's voice was softer when she finally spoke. I see. That is quite the tragic fate, isn't it? Shidhu didn't reply right away. He knew that, despite her outward calmness, this revelation cut deep. Instead, he offered something else. And one more thing, Mio, she should already be inside you by now. Kurumi's eye widened ever so slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise. Is that so? Shidhu nodded. I don't know how much she's influencing you or if she's waiting for the right moment to act, but she's there. Kurumi closed her eye for a moment, as if processing this information. Then, when she opened it again, she gave him a small, almost resigned smile. How cruel you are, Shido-san, to give me such troubling news back to back. Shidhu chuckled softly. Sorry. Kurumi tilted her head slightly before speaking again. Still, thank you for telling me. Shidhu met her gaze firmly. You might think what you're doing is meaningless, but it's not. Your efforts, they helped. You made your life useful for your original self. And no matter what happens, I won't let that be in vain. For a moment, Kurumi was silent. Then, after a brief pause, she let out a soft laugh. One that was neither mocking nor bitter, but something more, genuine. Era, you always know how to say such charming things, don't you? Shidhu smiled. I try. Without another word, Kurumi melted back into the shadows, disappearing as if she had never been there in the first place. Shidhu exhaled deeply, steeling himself for the battles ahead. Meanwhile, Rain sat in the quiet break room of Fraxinus, absent-mindedly sipping from a cup of coffee. Her eyes were distant, as if her mind was elsewhere. She barely reacted when the door opened and Toka stepped inside. The spirit hesitated for a moment before walking up to her. Rain. Rain lazily lifted her gaze. Toka looked uncharacteristically serious. Do you, like Shido? Rain's fingers briefly paused on her cup. Then, after a brief silence, she answered in her usual sleepy tone. Yeah. Toka studied her expression for a moment before nodding, seemingly satisfied. I see. Without another word, she turned and left the room. Rain, now alone, placed her cup down and stared at the liquid inside. She had answered honestly, and yet, something about the way Toka had asked that question bothered her. A strange unease settled in her chest, something she couldn't quite explain. But in the end, she chose to dismiss it, at least for now. The morning sun bathed the streets in a golden glow as Shidhu made his way to the designated meeting spot. Dressed casually but neatly, he adjusted his posture, feeling the subtle weight of the small, nearly invisible communicator discreetly attached to his collarbone. This should make things easier. The Fraxinus crew and spirits had insisted on helping him, and while he would have preferred to handle things on his own, he knew better than to refuse their support. Especially considering how unpredictable rain could be. A soft chime sounded in his ear. Maria's voice came through. Shido, we have full operational control. Remember, Rain must not detect the device, or our assistance will be compromised. No pressure, though, Miku added playfully. Shidhu sighed. Yeah, got it. As if on cue, a familiar sleepy voice called out to him. Shin. Shidhu turned to see Rain approaching, her usual sluggish demeanor making it seem as if she had just woken up. Despite that, she looked different today, perhaps because she wasn't in her Fraxinus uniform but instead in comfortable casual wear, giving off a more relaxed presence. Sorry to keep you waiting, she murmured, rubbing her eyes slightly. Shidhu shook his head. Not at all. You ready? Rain gave a small nod. With that, their date officially began. Their journey took them to a serene hot springs resort nestled within the mountains, where the crisp air carried the gentle scent of pine and warm steam from the baths. This is nice, Rain murmured, stretching her arms slightly as they arrived. Shido smiled. That's the idea. I wanted you to have a chance to relax. Though her expression remained drowsy as always, there was a noticeable softness in her gaze, a small but significant sign that she appreciated the thought. Meanwhile, back on Fraxinus, the spirits were all actively engaged in assisting the date. All right, everyone has their buzzers, correct? Maria's voice came through the communication link. Affirmative, Yuzuru confirmed. Just let us handle this, darling, Miku added cheerfully. Rimuru, who had been mostly silent, crossed her arms. Let's just make sure it goes well. Shido sighed internally. This was going to be chaotic. The date proceeded smoothly for the most part. They strolled through the resort grounds, visited a small souvenir shop, and eventually made their way to the highlight of the trip, the hot springs. Steam filled the air as Shido leaned against the edge of the men's side of the bath, letting out a deep sigh. The warmth of the water seeped into his muscles, easing the tension in his body. At least this part is actually relaxing. However, his moment of peace was short-lived as Maria's voice rang through his communicator. For privacy reasons, I have disabled all visuals from the hot spring area. What? You've got to be kidding me. Miku's voice protested dramatically. So unfair. One of the male crew members groaned. Rimuru, despite trying to maintain her usual composure, muttered under her breath. Whatever. Shido shook his head, choosing to ignore the complaints. Just then, a familiar voice called out from the other side of the bath. Shin. Shido turned slightly, realizing Rain was on the other side of the dividing wall. Her voice was as calm as ever, but something about the way she said his name felt different. You enjoying it? He asked. It's been a while since I've done something like this. A comfortable silence settled between them before Rain spoke again. Shin, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Shido glanced toward the wall. What is it? Rain paused for a moment before continuing. Do you remember much about your past? Before you were taken in by the Itsuka family. Shido blinked, caught off guard by the question. My past. Your birth mother. Shido frowned slightly, digging through his memories. Honestly, not much. My earliest memories are already with Kotori and the others. Rain remained silent, listening. But, Shido hesitated for a moment, then continued. I do remember being held by someone. I can't picture her face, but I remember feeling safe. Warm. So, I don't think I resent her. If she gave me up, she must have had a reason. Silence. Then, soft movement. Before Shido could react, he felt a pair of arms wrap around him from behind. His entire body stiffened as Rain embraced him, resting her chin gently on his shoulder. I see, she murmured. Shido's face burned. Rain-san. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply held him a moment longer, as if lost in thought. Then, with a small sigh, she finally released him. Thank you, Shin. Even as she returned to the other side of the bath, Shido remained frozen in place, his heart pounding. Back on Fraxinus, the spirits were in chaos. Wait, what just happened? Did rain just? Toka's voice was filled with disbelief. Why wasn't I watching? Miku wailed. Maria, bring back the footage. Nia demanded. Denied. Maria's voice was firm. Rimuru simply sighed, hiding her small smirk behind her hand. Shido, meanwhile, simply exhaled, rubbing his face. This was going to be a long day. As the day stretched on, Shido led Rain along a winding path, their footsteps crunching softly against the sand as the vast ocean came into view. The sight of the shimmering waves, rolling in with the rhythm of the tide, seemed to strike something deep within Rain. Ah! Shido glanced at her, noticing the way her usually drowsy expression softened, not from exhaustion but something far deeper. Do you like it? He asked. Rain didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped forward, letting the sea breeze ruffle her hair as her gaze wandered across the shore. It's nostalgic, she finally murmured. Shido's breath hitched. Of course it would be, this beach wasn't just any ordinary place. It was the very same one that Mio and Shinji once visited on their date, 30 years ago. The memories from his past confrontation with Mio resurfaced, the fragments of her history, the love she once held, and the tragedy that followed. Rain, or rather Mio, was remembering too. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply walked along the shore, letting the crashing waves fill the silence. Eventually, Rain sighed, the drowsy weight returning to her voice. Shin, this is nice. Before Shido could respond, she leaned against him, her body pressing lightly against his side. Then, without another word, she closed her eyes. Rain-san. No response. Shido tilted his head slightly, realizing that, against the sound of the waves, Rain had fallen asleep on his shoulder. A small chuckle escaped him. She really does fall asleep anywhere, huh? Back on Fraxinus, Kotori's voice crackled through the communicator. Status update. She's asleep. Again. Miku groaned. She really does have zero guard up around him, Origami noted. Affirmative. A prime opportunity, Shido, Yuzuru chimed in. Shido sighed, but he let her rest for now. When Rain stirred awake, she blinked slowly, adjusting to her surroundings. Then, suddenly. PFF'd, ha. Shido blinked in shock. Huh. Rain was laughing, not a tired chuckle or a sleepy murmur, but a genuine, unguarded laugh. You fell asleep on my shoulder and now you're laughing? Shido asked, raising a brow. It's just, funny. Rain wiped her eye, still chuckling softly. I must have looked ridiculous. Shido couldn't help but smile. It was rare to see Rain so openly expressive like this. You know, I wish I could see you like this more often, he admitted. Rain hummed, her laughter fading into something more thoughtful. Is that so? Another silence settled between them before she finally spoke again. Shin, you really do remind me of him. Shido's heart clenched. Him. Shinji Takamiya, the man Mio once loved, the one she lost. Before he could say anything, Kotori's voice suddenly came through the communicator. Shido. Her affection level, it's exceeded the threshold. Shido inhaled sharply. He knew what that meant. The spirits on Fraxinus collectively held their breath. Rimuru, who had been silent for most of the operation, finally spoke. You know what you have to do. Shido closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. Then, he turned to Rain. Rain-san, he murmured, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. She tilted her head slightly, eyes still heavy with nostalgia. Can I really replace him? Shido asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rain's expression faltered for just a moment. Shin. But before she could answer, Shido kissed her. The moment their lips met, something inside Shido shifted. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a connection, a bridge between their souls. A path formed. Rain's eyes widened as her consciousness was suddenly flooded with memories, not hers, but Shido's. Visions of a future that no longer existed. The battles, the losses, the pain of seeing Mio's plan come to fruition. The moment of his own death. And finally, Kurumi's sacrifice, rewinding time to give him one last chance to change everything. Rain gasped, pulling away. Shin. Her voice was different now, not drowsy, not teasing, but completely awake. You. Rain clutched her chest, her breathing unsteady as if struggling to process the flood of memories. You traveled back in time. Shido's eyes widened. He hadn't expected her to realize it so quickly. Rain's fingers trembled slightly as the weight of the truth sank in. Then that means, in that future. She trailed off, but Shido understood what she was trying to say. In that future, she never saw Shinji return. Shido took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. Rain-san, you don't have to go through with this. We can find another way. She looked at him, truly looked at him. A peaceful life with you, and the spirits. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Shido nodded. Yeah, we can be together. All of us. No more battles, no more sacrifices. Rain closed her eyes. For a moment, just a moment, Shido thought she might actually consider it. But then, Shido's breath caught in his throat. Rain opened her eyes again, and though there was a deep, lingering sadness in them, her resolve hadn't wavered. Even knowing everything, even if I could live a peaceful life with you, I still can't abandon what I once had with him. Her voice trembled slightly. The memories I experienced with Shinji, they were my first. The emotions, the pain, the love, I can't let go of them. Shido's hands clenched into fists. Rain-san. She smiled softly, but there was sorrow behind it. But, thank you, Shido. Thank you for showing me this. Rimuru Pav. The neighboring world around her was falling apart. Ain Sof, Mio's domain, fractured like a broken mirror, its golden radiance dimming into nothingness. Rimuru stood amidst the collapse, unmoving. She had devoured Mio. Her Beelzebub had swallowed everything, Mio's body, her power, and even her soul. Now, that soul rested within her, exposed to her analysis. Rimuru had expected to feel satisfaction. Vengeance for the fallen. Retribution for the spirits Mio had taken. Yet, all she found was tragedy. Mio's soul was pure. Despite all the destruction she had caused, despite the countless lives she had taken, it wasn't malice that had driven her. Only pain. Only loss. Rimuru's fingers curled into a fist. The others, she couldn't reach them. By the time she arrived, they were already gone. Their souls had slipped beyond even her grasp, vanishing into whatever lay beyond death. Mio, Ellen, Artemisia, those were the only ones she had managed to claim. The others, lost forever. She could try to bring them back. Yes, even without their souls, she had the means to recreate their bodies. She could reconstruct them exactly as they were. But, they wouldn't be the same. They would be empty. Shadows of who they had once been, nothing more than imperfect reflections. And even if she succeeded, even if she forced them to live again, would they even want to exist in a world without Shido? Rimuru's golden eyes darkened. She already knew the answer. What's the point? She murmured. Her breath left her lips, chilling the air around her. This world, this broken world where everything had been stolen away. What reason was there for it to continue existing? Perhaps, she should simply erase it. She flexed her fingers, feeling the overwhelming power coursing through her. With a single thought, she could crush it all. Reduce this world to nothingness. End it. Forever. But then, she hesitated. For a brief moment, the thought lingered. Annihilation. Erasing this world, this cruel timeline where everything had been lost, it would be simple. But, what would be the point? It wouldn't bring them back. It wouldn't change what had already happened. Rimuru exhaled, shaking the thought away. No, that wasn't the answer. She had failed to save the spirits in this world, but Shido, he had already gone back in time. He was fighting to change the future. And if he was willing to do that, then she had her own role to play. Still, Rimuru admitted something to herself. In this world, she was weak. The Raryoku granted to her in this reality was a far cry from her true power. It wasn't enough. But she could fix that. Seal. Understood. In an instant, the world around her shattered. Space itself bent, swirling into a chaotic vortex of light and darkness. She was moving through the space-time continuum. If this world had already fallen beyond saving, then she would save the next one. Unlike a normal human, her body could endure this journey. She wouldn't become a mindless husk. She pushed forward, deeper, farther. Until finally, the flow of time itself bent to her will. A flash of white. The feeling of her consciousness stabilizing. A familiar sensation. She opened her eyes. She had arrived. The day before the war between Westcott and Dem. And if her calculations were correct, Shido, the one from the previous timeline, should be here. Rimuru took a slow breath, flexing her fingers. This was her past body, as planned. But it was stronger than before. Her lips curled into a faint smile. Perfect. She took a step forward, walking through the halls of Fraxinus. She wasn't sure what she expected, but soon enough, she stopped, face to face with Shido. His eyes widened in shock. He remembered. Of course, he did. He had no idea if she had lived or died in that timeline. It didn't matter now. For the first time since she arrived, Rimuru spoke. Whatever you're planning, you'd better do it right. There was no hostility in her voice. No accusation. Just quiet understanding. Because no matter what, this time, neither of them would fail. End. Chapter 47.